You know that feeling when you've been using GPS to get absolutely everywhere for a few years?
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
then one day you're driving, your phone dies, and you suddenly realize you have absolutely no idea how to navigate your own neighborhood.
Right. It's like this complete and sudden evaporation of your own sense of direction.
Exactly.
It is a highly specific, very modern kind of panic.
Yeah.
I mean, you are sitting there at a traffic light looking at street signs that might as well be written in, a foreign language.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, you knew those roads once. Like, you used to have this mental map of how the major highways connected to the local streets.
You did.
But because you've been outsourcing that navigation to a satellite for so long, the skill just sort of faded. It got
Yeah,
soft.
absolutely.
But the thing is, if you were forced to turn off the radio and actually focus, you could probably find your way home.
Right.
The map is still in your head somewhere. It's just a little dusty.
Right. Because the foundational spatial knowledge is still there in your brain. You just
Yeah.
haven't been uh, actively accessing those neural pathways, so they feel pretty sluggish.
Right. But now I want you to imagine a scenario where you were born with that GPS already glued to your hand.
Oh, wow.
Like you never drove without it, not even once. You never learned how the roads connect. You never memorized the local landmarks. You never built an intuitive understanding of spatial relationships at all.
So in that scenario, the mental map isn't dusty.
No.
The map literally does not exist.
Exactly. Which brings us right into the heart of today's deep dive. Welcome in, everyone. Today we are looking at the hidden biological differences in how artificial intelligence is affecting human brains.
And this is such an important topic.
It really is. And crucially, we are looking at how those effects change completely based on age. We're pulling our insights from this really fascinating piece published in Psychology Today by Timothy Cook.
Right? He's an international educator and an AI researcher.
Yeah, and his article is titled, Adults Lose Skills to AI, Children Never Build Them.
It is a really profound reframing of a conversation that has been, dominating our culture for a while now.
Oh, totally.
I mean, we tend to talk about AI's impact in these broad, sweeping generalizations, but Cook forces us to look at the biology of who is actually sitting behind the keyboard.
Right, because the mission for us today, like our goal for this deep dive, is to figure out if AI is just making us all a little bit lazy or if it's doing something much more permanent.
Which is a scary thought.
It is. We need to understand if it's fundamentally rewiring the next generation's actual ability to think. So if you've ever felt a pang of guilt for asking an AI to summarize a massive document for work,
Which we all have.
right, or to draft a tricky, politically sensitive email for you, today we are going to figure out exactly what that is doing to your brain and why it is completely biologically different from what it's doing to a teenager's brain.
Yep.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
That guilt you mentioned is actually the perfect place to start. We all feel it.
Yeah, it's so real.
We offload a heavy cognitive task to a language model, and part of us quietly wonders, am I losing my edge? Like, is this basically cheating?
Right.
But Cook points out that society has been treating cognitive offloading as a single universal phenomenon. Like, we've been operating under the assumption that AI affects the mind of a 45-year-old veteran professional exactly the same way it affects the mind of a middle school student trying to write a history paper.
And Cook completely shatters that framing. I mean, he actually uses his own workflow as an example.
Which I loved.
Yeah, it's so relatable. He's been reading, dissecting, and summarizing complex academic research papers for like 15 years.
That's a lot of reading.
Seriously. And because of that decade and a half of grinding through the material, he knows the anatomy of a good argument. He knows how to spot a weak methodology. He knows exactly what to look for in the data.
Exactly.
So when he asks an AI to summarize a 50-page paper today, he's just saving himself 2 hours. He is offloading a task he already fundamentally knows how to do.
Right. And the distinction there is everything. He possesses the underlying capacity. He has already built the cognitive architecture required to synthesize that information.
Yeah, I was thinking about it like using AI as an adult is essentially like taking an escalator instead of the stairs.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like your leg muscles might get a little weak from lack of use, they get soft, but you still fundamentally know the mechanics of how to walk.
Right, right.
If the escalator breaks down tomorrow, you can still take the stairs. It might leave you a bit winded, it might take you twice as long, but your physical capability remains intact. That is cognitive atrophy.
Yeah, it is a weakened muscle, but it is a muscle that can be rebuilt with a little bit of effort.
Exactly.
But when we shift our focus to a 14-year-old student, the entire biological and cognitive paradigm changes. For that teenager, relying on AI is not atrophy. It is foreclosure.
Foreclosure. I mean, that's a heavy word to use for a kid just trying to get through homework.
It is, but it is the most scientifically accurate word. You cannot atrophy a muscle that was never built in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. If a child outsources their critical thinking to an AI, like if they use a chatbot to structure their essay or to evaluate the credibility of a historical
Which
source.
they all do now.
Exactly.
Mm.
The actual neural pathways required for source evaluation, for logic, for argument construction, they're simply never formed. The developmental window opens in their brain, the AI steps in to do the heavy lifting, and the window closes.
The brain simply never builds the capacity.
Exactly.
So the escalator is just carrying them up the floors, but they never actually learned how to fire the muscles in their own legs.
And, this isn't just some theoretical philosophical fear about technology. We are seeing it manifest in the data right now.
Right, the article mentions this.
Yeah, it highlights this study looking at how different demographics use AI tools in society. And the data paints a very clear bifurcated picture of cognitive development.
What did they find?
Well, when researchers looked at participants over the age of 46, they found higher critical thinking scores alongside a much lower reliance on AI.
Okay, makes sense.
But when they looked at the 17 to 25 demographic, like the generation that is still actively wiring their adult brains,
Yeah.
they saw the exact inverse. Very high AI reliance paired with significantly lower critical thinking scores.
Okay, I have to push back on that framing a little bit, though.
All right, go for it.
Isn't that just a generational preference masquerading as a biological deficit?
How do you mean?
Well, it reminds me of how younger generations overwhelmingly prefer texting over calling, right? Or using a certain social media app over another. Older people didn't grow up with AI at their fingertips, so they naturally don't use it as much, and therefore they rely on traditional critical thinking to get the job done.
I see where you're going.
Yeah, like maybe the younger group just likes using the tech more. Couldn't it just be a tool preference rather than a sign that their brains are, like, foreclosing on critical thought?
It is incredibly tempting to look at it as just a cultural or generational habit. Really tempting. But Cook argues, and the cognitive science backs this up, that we are looking at a fundamental disruption in biological development, not just a preference for a shiny new tool.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the older group in the study is offloading tasks they already know how to perform. They are looking at a heavy lift and actively choosing efficiency.
Right, the escalator.
Exactly.
Ah.
But the younger group is offloading tasks and they never actually learned how to perform. They aren't choosing efficiency over effort. They are entirely bypassing the developmental struggle required to build critical thinking.
Oh, wow. So they're not even trying to take the stairs.
No. The older group is resting their muscles. The younger group is preventing their muscles from ever existing in the first place.
Okay, which brings up a really practical question. If a teenager is bypassing the struggle right now, my first instinct is that they could just catch up later.
Like in college.
Yeah, exactly. They use an AI to write their essays in high school to get the grade, but then they learn the actual mechanics of critical thinking when they get to college or when they enter the corporate workforce. Like they learn the facts now and they learn the thinking later.
I wish it worked like that.
But Cook seems to imply there is a mechanical roadblock preventing them from just catching up.
Yeah, that roadblock is what Cook calls the audit problem. And it explains exactly why you cannot simply delay cognitive development and expect to catch up on a Tuesday afternoon 5 years later.
The audit problem. Okay.
Yeah. To understand why they can't just catch up, we have to look closely at what happens the exact moment the AI spits out an answer on a screen.
Right. Let's walk through this audit problem because this crystallized the whole issue for me when I was reading the article.
The core of the argument.
So when an adult asks an AI a question, we have this built-in ability to audit the response. If I ask a chatbot to explain, like, a complex economic theory for a meeting I'm prepping for, and it spits back a 3-paragraph summary, I am reading that summary through the lens of my existing adult knowledge of how the world works.
You're running it through your own internal filter.
Right. I can spot if it oversimplifies the geopolitical factors. I can catch if it leaves out important historical context, or if the tone is way too confident considering how weak the underlying economic evidence actually is.
Because you've lived in the real world.
Exactly. I can audit the AI because I already have a baseline of judgment.
Right, you have a framework of reality. You have years of lived experience and acquired knowledge to check the machine's output against. You are fact-checking the vibe of the text as much as the data itself.
But a child cannot do that. A middle schooler cannot effectively audit an AI's analysis of genetic heredity or the causes of the French Revolution,
Oh, they can't.
because auditing requires the exact domain knowledge that the child is currently supposed to be learning.
It's a complete paradox.
It really is. It's like being asked to proofread a highly technical book in a language you literally do not speak. They have to trust the machine blindly because they don't have the internal framework to question it.
And what's fascinating here is the psychological shift that occurs based on that inability to audit. For an adult, using AI is an act of delegation.
Delegation.
Yeah, think about delegating a task to a junior assistant in an office. You hand off the work, but you still retain the ultimate judgment. You review their draft, you approve it, you make corrections, you remain the cognitive boss.
Right. I'm still in charge of the outcome.
Exactly. But for a child who cannot audit the output, using AI isn't delegation, it is substitution.
Oh, wow. So the AI isn't the assistant anymore. The AI is the boss.
And as the boss, it is making all the invisible microjudgments for them.
What do you mean by microjudgments?
Well, when you write a paper, you make hundreds of tiny decisions. Which facts are most important to emphasize? What is the logical flow of this argument? How should this specific sentence be structured to persuade the reader?
Right. All those little tweaks.
Yeah. And the child using AI isn't learning how to weigh those options and make those judgments. The machine is completely substituting its own mathematical judgment for the child's developing mind.
And what's really wild is that this substitution effect, this danger of taking the AI's word for it when you don't have a baseline, isn't just a problem for teenagers.
No, it's not.
Cook points out a massive caveat for adults. Like, adults aren't magically immune if they try to use AI to learn something brand new, where they lack that existing framework to audit the output.
Yes, the study on software developers illustrates this brilliantly. It is such a vital inclusion in Cook's argument.
Yeah, let's talk about that study.
So this was a study involving software developers. We are talking about adults here. These are working professionals with substantial existing expertise in programming.
Grown professional software engineers. People whose literal job is logic and code.
Exactly. So the study looked at these developers as they tried to learn a completely new, unfamiliar coding library. One group used AI assistants, fully delegating the coding tasks to the language model.
Okay.
The other group did not use AI. They had to learn it the old-fashioned way, struggling through the documentation.
The hard way.
The hard way, yeah. Now, the group using the AI produced working code. They got the job done quickly and efficiently.
Makes sense.
But afterward, the researchers gave both groups conceptual quizzes to see if they actually understood the new coding library they had just used. They asked them to explain the logic of the functions without the code in front of them.
And what happened?
The group that used AI utterly failed.
Wait, really? Utterly failed?
Yes, they had the final product, but zero understanding of the process it took to get there.
So when the code inevitably had a bug later on.
They couldn't debug what the AI had written because they didn't conceptually grasp how it operated. Even with their massive existing expertise in programming generally, the developers who used AI performed 17% worse on the conceptual quizzes than the group that learned through the friction of trial and error without AI.
Wow. 17% worse. And if you think about what that means in a broader context, if adult professional software engineers fail to grasp new concepts when they use AI as a shortcut, imagine a child encountering programming,
Right.
or history, or literature, or any core subject for the very first time. They have absolutely zero baseline to fall back on.
Exactly.
They aren't just failing a conceptual quiz at the end of a study, they are failing to build the architecture of understanding itself.
And that substitution hardens into foreclosure. They get the A on the history paper, they get the computer code to run perfectly, but internally, the cognitive structure supporting that output is entirely hollow.
That is so eerie. If the developers in that study ended up with hollow cognitive structures, that raises a pretty terrifying question for adolescents. If the child's brain isn't building its own architecture through struggle and independent thought,
Yeah.
what is moving into that empty biological real estate?
Right, that is the ultimate existential question of this research. If a child's unique perspective isn't filling the space, something else has to.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Cook admits in the article that his own thinking on this specific question has radically shifted over the past year.
Yeah, he had a real wake-up call.
He did. He says he used to look at classrooms where every single kid was turning in these eerily similar essays, like identical arguments, the exact same supporting examples, the same sterile, perfectly polite tone.
The classic AI tone.
Right. And he just thought of it as a cheating problem or, a logistical assessment problem for teachers. Like, how is a teacher supposed to grade 30 essays if a robot wrote all of them?
Yeah, it was viewed primarily as an academic integrity issue. Just a headache for the education system to solve with, like, better plagiarism detectors.
But now he doesn't see it as a grading problem at all. He sees this homogenization of student work as a diagnostic signal of a massive generational identity crisis.
And we really sit with the mechanics of how that identity crisis happens. When an entire classroom of 30 students uses the exact same large language model to process their information, to brainstorm their ideas, to write their essays, they are all learning to reason through the exact same system.
Because the AI isn't just handing them isolated facts, it's showing them the exact structural way to connect those facts.
And there's hard data on what that structure looks like.
Yeah, the research on this is wild.
Right. The article cites this study that examined the homogenizing effect of large language models. They found that these models don't just homogenize vocabulary, like making everyone sound like a customer service representative. They actively homogenize perspective.
Perspective. Wow.
Yes. The reasoning strategies of the users converge, and they track heavily toward Western, educated, mainstream norms.
And it's crucial to understand the mechanism behind that. Like, why does it track toward the mainstream?
Right. Why?
It's because an LLM works by predicting the next most statistically probable word based on its training data. If the vast majority of its training data comes from Western, mainstream, highly educated sources, the AI mathematically cannot generate a truly alternative or outlier perspective without heavy prompting.
That's just how the math works.
Yeah, it is a statistical probability engine that, by definition, reverts to the mathematical average of human thought.
So the models are actively pruning away eccentric, unique, or outlier reasoning by design. The safety alignments and the sheer volume of mainstream data force the output to converge on the most standard, unoffensive, average thought possible.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Aren't schools already doing that? I mean, aren't schools inherently designed to teach a standardized way of thinking? You have a state-mandated curriculum. You have a single teacher standing at the front of the room telling 30 kids the correct way to analyze a Shakespeare poem or solve an algebraic equation.
That's a fair point.
Right. So how is an AI giving standardized, mathematically average answers any different from a human teacher giving a standard curriculum?
It is a vital distinction to make, though. A standard curriculum, even a very rigid one, gives a student facts and frameworks to think about.
Think out, okay.
Yes. The teacher provides the destination, but the student still has to walk the path. They have to do the internal work of digesting that information, questioning it, getting frustrated by it, making mistakes, and ultimately articulating it in their own voice.
Right.
What the AI does is fundamentally different. It doesn't just provide the destination. It takes over the actual process of thinking. It walks the path for them.
It is doing the internal digestion for them.
And the result is that the cognitive output is entirely generic. Now, think about the difference in impact. For an adult using AI, if you send an email that sounds a bit generic and sterile, it is not a big deal.
Nobody really cares.
Exactly. You are still you. You still have your own vibrant personality, your own quirks, and your own reasoning skills operating outside of that email.
Right.
But for a child who has never formed independent reasoning, generic isn't just an adopted writing style. Generic becomes their entire cognitive identity. The AI isn't competing with the child's established reasoning. It becomes their reasoning.
The statistical average of the internet literally becomes the architecture of the child's mind. That is, wow. They aren't learning how to think like themselves. They're learning how to think like an aggregate of the most common, mathematically probable assumptions available online.
Which means we are looking at the potential for an entire generation that approaches problem-solving, morality, and creative expression from the exact same statistically homogenized baseline.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
We started this deep dive talking about that unsettling feeling of your mental GPS getting a little dusty and that pang of guilt we feel when we offload our heavy thinking to a machine.
Right.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is that whether you are using AI to speed up your workday or you are watching a teenager use it to breeze through their homework, or you're just trying to stay sharp yourself, you have to clearly recognize the actual trade-off you were making.
It is always a trade-off between decreasing your cognitive effort and increasing your operational efficiency.
Exactly. And if you already have the skills, like if you are an adult offloading a task you fundamentally understand, that atrophy is usually recoverable. You can force yourself to take the stairs again if you really need to.
Yeah, you can get the muscle back.
But for kids, skipping that developmental struggle isn't a shortcut, it is an amputation. Skipping that friction means the capacity for deep, independent, non-homogenized thought might be permanently foreclosed.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Timothy Cook leaves us with a very stark final warning.
Was
The downside of adults constantly offloading their cognition to AI is that we, as a society, might get a little less sharp. Our mental muscles might get soft. But the downside of adolescents growing up delegating their micro-judgments to algorithms is an entire generation that was never sharp to begin with.
Man.
Yeah. Protecting the biological and psychological space that children require to develop foundational thinking isn't just an educational debate anymore. It is an absolute non-negotiable for the survival of human intellect.
It is the difference between temporarily losing the map and never bothering to draw it in the first place.
Well said.
Which leaves me with one final kind of wild thought for you to chew on after you finish listening to this deep dive. If AI eventually takes over all the standard mainstream generic reasoning in our society,
Right.
if it can instantly produce the perfect statistically average essay or email or business plan, will the most valuable human skill of the future simply be the ability to think incorrectly?
Oh.
To think weirdly or inefficiently? In a perfectly homogenized world where every AI sounds exactly the same, maybe the ultimate advantage won't be your efficiency, but your own eccentricity, your own messy, entirely unpredictable human deviations from the mathematical norm. Just something to think about the next time you ask a chatbot to rewrite your thoughts. Thanks for joining us.